Guys, gals, non-binary pals, today's video, I'm really excited about making this. This is something that I've been wanting to talk about, and this is like, I wanted to make this video because I wanted to have my, kind of like my journey of how I started, how I was able to, what I call, start mindful eating and how I got to that point. Obviously, this has taken quite a long time, and there's a reason why I don't call it intuitive eating, which we'll get into, but I kind of want to start from the beginning. So when it came to like diet and stuff, obviously growing up and eating and all that stuff, I had literally zero knowledge. Like I was someone that I knew absolutely nothing about nutrition, nothing about calories. I didn't know what calories were. If you asked me what are the macronutrients of bread, I'd be like, what are you talking about? I didn't know what protein was, carbs were, fat. Like I had zero knowledge. Okay. So the reason that I start there is, so when I first started losing weight, I think it was 2012 or 2013 when I started losing weight. I was 20 years old. And at that point I was, 360 pounds, actually probably a little bit heavier than that. But that's what I started with. I had zero knowledge about what I should be doing. So what I started was what I've coined as the common sense diet. And so what the common sense diet for me was cutting out the things in my diet that I knew were not good. Now, so those things were for me, soda, fast food, and junk food. So for me, soda, the reason that soda was such a big deal was because I was drinking a 2 liter or more of soda every day. I remember I would go to 7-Eleven and I would get the double gulp, which is the equivalent to a 2 liter of soda, and this is always full calorie soda, but that would just be a snack. I'd get that with some chips and maybe like a hot dog that they had in the hot tray thing that they have there. And that would just be a snack, right? So I was drinking a 2 liter minimum of soda every single day. Seriously, every single day. I remember I've thought back a few times, and it's crazy because there was a time where I like couldn't remember the last time I drank just regular water because I just never drank water. It was always soda, even with breakfast. So I cut out soda. That was one thing that is like the way that I thought of it when I first started losing weight was, regardless of how much information I might have about nutrition, like what are things that you know aren't good for you, right? So for me, soda, obviously that's an easy one. And then fast food and junk food. So when I say fast food, that was like going to McDonald's. I would go to McDonald's all the time. I live in San Diego, so we have really good Mexican food. So I would go to Mexican food and get like, carne asada fries all the time, California burritos with sour cream. If you ever come to San Diego, I highly recommend you try that out. So I cut that stuff out. And then when I say junk food, I'm talking about like chips and candy bars. Just, again, things that for the most part, probably isn't the best thing to do when you're trying to lose weight. So that's what I started with. And that's how I started my diet. That's how I started my journey. And then actually, because of how large I was, cutting those things out and not worrying about tracking. I didn't track at that time. I didn't know how to track at that time. I just cut out things that I knew were unhealthy for me. I actually saw some pretty good results. Now, it all started really good. Like I really had, I would say, a good relationship with food. I was understanding, okay, what things I should avoid. But then eventually it got unhealthy. Now, what do I mean by that? So those good intentions that I had over time got warped, and then they became kind of almost nefarious, and they became damaging to me. So I started to cut out those things, but then eventually I started to realize, okay, I'm losing weight. How can I lose weight faster? And the answer in my head, and again, this is going to be a little bit triggering. So if you're someone that struggles with like binge eating or any sort of eating disorder, this part might be a little triggering. But I started to be like, okay, so calories. I started to kind of understand calories a little bit, and then I was like, okay, so I'm eating this amount of calories, so I just need to eat less. And so it started off as good, but then it was like, how can I cut calories? How can I cut calories? And this is when, in my head, calories started to become evil, and they started to become, a bad thing. And so I started just cutting out calories in any way that I could, and like really, really, really cutting them down, like significantly. To when I had lost like probably about 100 pounds doing this, maybe even more. But then it got to a point where at this time in my life, I was working 2 jobs. So I was working at the Vans shoe store, which was the first job that I ever had. And then I worked at Vons. So I worked at Vans and Vons. Vons, which is a grocery store. and I worked in the meat department. And when I worked there, we had to like unload every day we would get a shipment of meat. There'd be frozen meat that you had to like take off the pallet, and they were like heavy boxes. So I remember when I was working both those jobs, a typical day of eating for me would be in the morning, I would eat one packet of plain oatmeal, 100 calories, one packet plain. I wouldn't put anything in it. I would cook it with water. That was breakfast. And then usually I might have work at Vans, because at Vons I usually worked at night. I might have work at Vans. And then for lunch, I would have one of the pre-made salads that they have at Vons with an apple. And then for a snack, while I was working at Vons, I might have another apple. So that was pretty normal for me. And then for dinner, I would either eat the leftovers or like eat what my mom had made. So it might be pasta, it might be chicken and rice or whatever, but it was always a really small portion of that. Or I would get stuff from Vons and I would make like a chicken salad. So that was a pretty normal day of eating for me at this time. Now, I don't know how many of you guys are tracking, but that was like 1,000, maybe less calories each day. Now, I started to notice that this was a problem because I would be working at Vons, and sometimes I'd be sitting, and I'd go to stand up, and it started to become normal that when I'd stand up, I'd feel a little dizzy. And now, this obviously was a problem. Now, at the same time as this is when I was definitely struggling with binge eating. So that's what I was dealing with. So that's the type of calories that I was eating. That was a typical day of eating. And that would be maybe 3-4 days out of the week. But the other couple days out of the week, I would try and do that. But then I would just go so absolutely hard on like in tons of food, right? Like whatever I had at my house, I would just eat thousands of calories. Now at this time, I didn't realize what I was dealing with. I didn't realize what was going on. I felt that I wasn't hard enough. I felt like I needed to be more dedicated. I felt that if I can do something for one day, really severely cut my calories, I should be able to do it for the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day. When in reality, just because you can do something for one day, that doesn't mean that you are capable of holding on to that and being able to do that for years, months, years to come. So I was struggling with binge eating. And I didn't realize it at the time. Now, I saw someone in chat ask me if I was working out at the time. Now, at this time, I wasn't. I lost a lot of my weight without working out. This is why I'm such a big proponent of weight loss happens in the kitchen, fitness happens in the gym. So I wasn't working out. I didn't really have a car. I didn't have a way to get to the gym. Now, the way that I was able to I don't want to say I fixed my binge eating because that's not what I'm trying to say. But what helped me was I actually, for a little bit of time, I've told this before, but a little bit of time, I was actually thinking about joining the military. So I was thinking about joining the Air Force. And I knew that if you join the military, you have to pass some sort of physical. You have to be able to do some push-ups and sit-ups. And I don't think pull-ups is part of it, but in my head, I had to do pull-ups. So you have to be able to do some physical activity. So I was like, okay, I need to join a gym. I need to start working out. And so that's when I finally joined a gym. I started watching YouTube videos. This is why it's so cool that I am considered a YouTuber, because YouTube really helped me lose a lot of my weight, and it helped me learn about working out. But I started going to the gym. And that was when I started lifting. And as I was lifting more and working out more, I was just naturally more hungry at this time. And so I just kind of started eating more because I was so hungry. And like in my head, I was like, well, I'm working out, so I should be eating more, right? That was kind of what happened. And this was like a long process, but for quite a long time, over quite a long period of time, I would say that like, my quote unquote binge eating got better. Now, it didn't completely fix itself at all. It took a long time for this to happen, but eventually I got to a point where I wasn't binging. Now, at the same time, though, so I was doing all of that, but then that was when I started making YouTube videos. And then in 2016, so this was about 2-3 years after I had lost the initial weight, I did what I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen. I did my physique show in 2016. So what that meant for me was I actually did bulk, quote unquote, bulk for about 8 months before I did the show. So I allowed myself to have a little bit more food, which for me was actually a really good thing because it made me realize that, okay, I can eat a little bit of food, and yes, I will gain some fat, but I won't gain an obscene amount of weight right away. It's not like, oh, I started eating a little bit above my maintenance and now I'm 500 pounds, you know? But that's like what goes through your head if you're someone that struggled with your weight. So it really helped me realize that, okay, it's like I will notice if I'm starting to gain weight. And so I did the bulk and then I did a cut. Now, when I did the cut and while I was bulking, that's when I first started actually tracking my macros. So I tracked my macros very religiously for about a year and a half. Like every single gram that went into my body. I was very, very particular. I was very strict with myself. And so for me, tracking, while I don't do it anymore, I am not someone that hates tracking. Because tracking macros taught me so much. So, like, the amount of information I got from tracking my macros and being strict with myself and learning, it's invaluable. Like, if I didn't have that information, I don't think I'd be able to do what I do now. So I'm not a hater of tracking macros, but well, I'm not a hater. I'm going to be honest. I don't like tracking my macros. It's not fun. I don't enjoy it, but I understood the reason that I was doing it, and I'm glad that I did it. Just because I don't like doing something doesn't mean I don't see that there can be some value gleaned from it. And the value that I gleaned from it was understanding calories in certain foods, the macro breakdown of certain foods, and that really helped me in the long run. Now, so when I did the show, so I bulked up and then I cut down to 180 pounds. Now, 180 pounds for me is very, very lean. So I currently weigh about 210 pounds. So that's about 30 pounds less than I weigh right now. So I was pretty lean for myself. I remember the day of the show, after we had competed, we went to Denny's and we got food. And I was like, I'm not going to track. And I remember telling myself the day of my physique show, I am not tracking anymore. I don't want to track when I'm done with the show. I don't want to do it anymore. It stresses me out. It's annoying. I don't want to do it. But I was terrified that if I'm not tracking, that means that I'm just going to gain a ton of weight because I can't control myself. But I just gave myself one grace, and I trusted that I learned enough through tracking that I can make smart decisions. And so this is the moment. Now, again, this was, 2016, 5 years ago. This was the moment when I started, I didn't know at the time, but when I started the diet that I follow now, which is what I call mindful eating. So what mindful eating is I've used all of the things that I have learned in the past, from tracking my macros, from, eating way too little, from dealing with binge eating, from dealing with all of those things, understanding how my body felt from that. I use all of those things and I am mindful about the decisions that I make. So the reason I don't like calling it intuitive eating is because I feel like intuitive eating has taken on its own kind of a life of its own, and people really, really hate the term and people don't enjoy it. So, I like to call it mindful eating or mindful nutrition. So what I mean by that is that I am mindful of the decisions that I'm making. So it's like, I understand that if I were to have a whole pizza, I would feel terrible afterwards. Not because I would have guilt, but physically my body would not feel well. And I want to perform well for the training that I'm doing. Currently I'm training for a triathlon. So I am mindful about that and I decide not to have the pizza and I make a better decision. But sometimes I want to have a cupcake. Sometimes I want to have a slice of pizza. Sometimes I want to have those things. I understand what, how my body might react, but I am able to be like, that's fine. It's not a problem, and I can decide to do that. So I have completely changed up my training styles, and right now I'm doing a ton of cardio, way more than I ever have in the past. And so in my head, with the mindful nutrition, I have just naturally started to eat more carbs and just calories in general to facilitate the training that I'm doing. And so it's something that it worked for me when I hurt myself last year, in the beginning of quarantine, when I hurt my back and I couldn't really lift, I couldn't really move very much. In my head of mindful nutrition, I was like, okay, I don't need to eat as much. I wasn't as hungry because I wasn't moving as much. And it was just a natural thing that I did, right? And so that's how the reason I wanted to make this video was I wanted to share my whole journey from zero knowledge, knowing nothing about nutrition, finding these, little ways, using these little things, sharing the journey that I went through. This was over years and years and years to a point where I am now. I feel like I understand my body. I understand what my body needs, and I'm mindful of the things that I should be doing. And I try and make good decisions based on that, regardless if I'm training for a triathlon, a marathon, doing CrossFit, doing bodybuilding. If I'm injured and I can't move, I feel like the mindful nutrition, the things that I have learned over years, gives me the options, and it gives me what I feel like is the right choice to make for my body at that specific moment. And so hopefully this helped you out. Like currently I don't track. I haven't tracked my macros in many, many years. I don't plan on doing it, but who knows? Maybe if in the future, if I have a triathlon coach that really thinks it might help me. I mean, I'm not against it. It's not like I'll never do it again, but I don't plan on doing it. But again, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I actually think it can be a very, very good step, a very good stepping stone on how to get to mindful eating. And I'm not going to ever be someone that says like tracking is a bad thing. I can't stand when people are like, oh, it's an eating disorder. I think that's freaking stupid, and those people are ridiculous. Yes, it can be dangerous for some people, but just because something can be dangerous for some doesn't mean that it's going to be dangerous for all. But hopefully that helped, and hopefully that my journey was able to maybe inspire some people, let you know that if you are struggling with where I was in the depths and in the pits, there is a way out. I really do believe that.